Education BHU. I welcome you all on behalf of Indian Research Scholars Association in this book discussion series. And the book is A Democracy on Trial, Majoritarianism and Dissent in India. And this book is written by Zoya Hasan, and book is published by Akar Publication. And now I will invite the Dr. Hemant sir for the welcome address. Over to you, Hemant sir.
Thank you so much, and good evening, everyone. So, myself, Dr. Hemant Kumar. On the behalf of Indian Research Scholar Association, it is my honor to welcome you all to this important book discussion program on democracy on trial, majoritarianism and dissent in India. So, first of all, we are especially privileged to have Professor Balveer Arora sir for presiding over today's session. Professor Arora is a professor, emeritus, and chairman at the Center for Multilevel Federalism Institute of Social Sciences and former professor and rector at the Jawahar University. We are also grateful to Professor Zoya ma'am. She is a professor emerita at the Center for Political Studies and former dean of the School of Social Sciences, Jawahar University, for delivering the introductory remarks. Our panel today brings together some of the finest minds engaging with the complexities of political life in India. So I welcome to Iswaran Sridharan from the University of Pennsylvania Institute for the Advanced Study of India, New Delhi. Dr. Ajay Gudavarthy is an associate professor at the Center for Political Studies, Jawahar University, and Dr. Amir is an assistant professor at the Center for Political Studies, JNU. So I extend a warm welcome to all our speakers, participants, and attendees who have joined us for this intellectually enriching dialogue. I am confident that today's discussion will provide reflection, deepen and understanding, and inspire much needed debate on the challenges and possibilities that lie ahead for Indian democracy. And once again, welcome to all. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Ms. Sakshi for further processing. Ms. Sakshi, please, over to you.
Thank you, Hemant sir. And now it's a time to invite Professor Balveer Arora sir for the opening remark. Open to you. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Sakshi. Thank you, Hemant. And it's a great pleasure to be with friends and notably today to discuss this very important book by my dear friend and colleague Zoya Hasan, Democracy on Trial, Majoritarianism and Dissent. I think both the three key words in the title sum up in a sense what she has tried to do, and we will be discussing that in greater detail, the panelists who are going to follow what I have to say. I think the main, I would only flag 2 or 3 points for their consideration when they are making their comments. The first is that the 5 areas that seem to be important, the dissent, media, rights, protests, and opposition, the opposition space and voice. One of the things that is frequently mentioned in the democratic erosion, on diminution of state capacity, is an old theme which constantly keeps recurring but is constantly disproved, and that is the end of ideology. We have got used to considering democracy primarily as electoral democracy and the combat between different electoral machines, but often forgetting that this is a triangle. This is a triangle where uh, institutions, parties, and ideology are interwoven and interact with each other. One of the things that I would like to flag is the difference between electoral democracy as we have known it and the electoral democracy as it is unfolding before our eyes is a massive return of ideology. This dimension needs to be grappled with. We had got used to electoral machines, party organizations competing for power through elections, but never have we seen electoral contests imbued with very clear ideological thrusts and objectives. So I would like to put ideology at the center of our debate in order to understand how the processes and uh, the description, the analysis that is present in this book can be understood and can be analyzed. The second thing that I would like to mention is that one talks about erosion of democracy, very often electoral democracy. The impact of neoliberalism on state capacity is, I think, an equally important phenomenon to be understood, because state capacity is directly linked with the way in which democratic processes unfold. And so we need to understand how the state itself is undergoing a change which, when injected with an ideology, and to use the terms that Professor Hasan is using, majoritarianism. Majoritarianism is a way of looking at electoral politics, but perhaps we could think of other words to describe the ideologies that are contesting. Now, I don't want to talk for very long. I'll have occasion to intervene later, but I think Professor Sridharan was slated to be the first speaker, but I don't see him yet. So I was talking, hoping that I'd see him.
I'm here. I'm here. I'm so sorry. I had some technical issues in joining, but I'm very much here. Yes.
You are there. Okay,
Yes,
I'm
yes.
relieved. Otherwise, I was going to hold forth for another 5 minutes. But I think I will stop here and ask you to perform your role as the lead, one of the panelists, to discuss this book. So we look forward to listening to you, Sri.
Thank you, Balveer. I will.
Sorry, sir. Balveer, sir, sorry for interference. But, sir, before the panelist, Professor Zoya madam will give the introductory. Sorry, sir.
Okay.
That's what I thought. That's what I thought. I thought that was the plan. Yes.
That is the plan. That is still the plan. It's my oversight. So Zoya is going to introduce the book, and then Sri will begin the discussion on it. So Zoya, over to you.
Thank you, thank you, Balveer, and I'd like to thank the Indian Research Scholars Association, especially Vikas Sagar and Hemant Kumar, for organizing this discussion. And I'm absolutely delighted that my friends and colleagues are participating in this panel, led by Balveer and Sridharan and Amir and Ajay Gudavarthy. So it is really wonderful to have one's colleagues and friends participate in the discussion. And I think Balveer has actually set the context very, very well. And I'm very glad that he started it, because in a sense, he has broadened the context within which I will just very briefly speak about the main themes of the book. Now, Democracy on Trial offers an analysis of contemporary Indian democracy, interrogating the rise of majoritarian politics and its implications for pluralism, constitutionalism, and dissent. It is essentially an account of how India's democracy is being recalibrated around a majoritarian ideology, positioning Hindus as the default national community. Now, following its independence in 1947, India established a full-fledged democracy based on equal rights. This was a bold experiment, perhaps the most significant in a post-colonial society of multiple faiths, languages, and regional cultures. It is a great success story of the post-war era. Democracy has not only survived, it has been institutionalized, barring the period of the emergency, which marked repudiation of democratic processes. Historically, India's democracy has worked well precisely because no single culture, language, or identity is central to its identity or unity. Now, India's stunning linguistic, cultural, and religious diversity has been supported since independence by a political structure that emphasizes equal rights for all. However, India has changed politically, socially, and economically. The very idea of a democracy based on equal rights, irrespective of caste, class, or faith, has changed under the pressure of democratic politics. These shifts are exemplified in the consolidation of a majoritarian brand of politics, concentration of power in the hands of the executive, and curbs on dissent and opposition. Now, each of these three shifts are significant in their own right. Taken together, they signify India's slide into authoritarianism and majoritarianism, which are arguably mutually facilitating processes. Now, these changes are explained in the book by focusing on two overlapping developments: the expansion of majoritarian politics and the shrinking space for dissent and pluralism in the past decade. Now, this structural shift is characterized by the assertion of a Hindu nationalist ideology that seeks to redefine the Indian nation in narrowly cultural and religious terms. The BJP has leveraged its electoral victories and popular support to normalize majoritarianism and to marginalize dissenting voices. This political order, I argue, this political order departs significantly from India's post-independence democratic consensus, which was grounded in pluralism, secularism, and the protection of minority rights. So what has happened now is not merely a change in government or a policy regime, but it signals a deeper ideological shift from a civic republican idea of the Indian nation to an ethno-religious conception. This ideological shift has been institutionalized through state practices, legislation, and coercive mechanisms that marginalize minorities and which curtails their participation in the public sphere. Now, a major theme in the book is the weakening of democratic institutions that were once bulwarks against authoritarian tendencies. Now, right wing regimes led by authoritarian leaders tend to centralize power in themselves, thereby weakening institutions. And the systematic attempt to give the executive an upper hand in most matters has been achieved by the regime's ability to control institutions, either by appointing people who are ideologically aligned to it or are favorably inclined towards it and will not resist the regime's political vision, resulting in a decline in accountability and transparency. Now, this institutional capture is symptomatic of a broader phenomenon of democratic erosion that Balveer just mentioned, wherein checks and balances are undermined not through always through authoritarian means or setting aside elections, but via legal and administrative manipulation. The result is a concerted effort to stamp out dissent in pursuit of political control and ideological dominance, which is at the root of the authoritarian propensity. Now, this extreme concentration of executive power is paralleled by a concentration of economic power as the government bestows tax breaks and policy favors on big business, which in turn reciprocates by extending huge financial support to the ruling party. India's growth is heavily weighted towards the wealthy, who have become exponentially richer in the last decade. And driving these trends in inequality is a policy regime that favors monopoly capital, resulting in an extraordinary concentration of wealth in the coffers of a few corporate actors, some new business houses, and at the same time, large numbers of people are out of work. In fact, one estimate puts unemployment at more than 40%. And not surprisingly, the Prime Minister hardly ever talks about unemployment. Even though this regime is more powerful than most previous ones, it is more intolerant of criticism and dissent. It senses that despite the popular mandate in 2 consecutive elections and, well, less than a majority in the most recent elections, it feels probably, and especially after the fact that it did not win a majority in the 2024 elections, that its thought control is not complete. The result then is to control every person who thinks or disagrees. Now, the systematic delegitimization of dissent, the vilification of human rights defenders, and the erosion of institutional autonomy form the bedrock of this emergent political order. And I think what is really striking about this regime, as indeed most right-wing regimes which are dominant as we speak, is that the space for and recognition of political opposition, I mean party-based opposition, as a vital part of democracy has been considerably reduced. This was made clear with the drive to establish a Congress-free political landscape in the country, Congress Mukt Bharat, that has now been extended to one establishing an opposition-free political space. However, democracies decline when opposition is no longer tolerated and when elected politicians use the full might of the law to quash rather than compromise with their opponents. But I think one of the important points that I do make in this book is that the regime has proceeded as far as it has through control of the corporate owned but government controlled media. And I underline this: corporate owned but government controlled media network, which has established a completely new information order, which is not like the information order that existed even though we have had corporate controlled media for such a long time. So the Bharatiya Janata Party and its corporate allies have gradually seized control of the mainstream media, in particular the television media, but also sections in the print media. And the whole information order, particularly media in vernacular languages such as Hindi and most television channels, is tightly controlled and appears to be working as a propaganda arm of the government. Now, in conclusion, then, I just want to raise 2 or 3 issues. I think one of the core theoretical themes in the book is the concept of democratic erosion or democratic backsliding or illiberal democracy, and how democratic backsliding occurs even within formally democratic systems. As in many other countries, the BJP regime is adopting, as I've argued, increasingly authoritarian practices using the tools of democracy, elections, legislative majorities, executive discretion to undermine democratic values. Now, this raises several questions. Number one, can democracy survive without pluralism? Pluralism is not just a normative good, but a structural necessity for democratic functioning. The majoritarian turn in India challenges this premise. This is the first issue that the first question that I want to raise, which is the relationship between democracy and pluralism. And in the Indian case, with our spectacular diversity, can democracy survive? Can we have a healthy democracy without pluralism? Number two, what is the role of institutions in safeguarding democracy? While institutions are often seen as the bulwarks against authoritarianism, analysis in this book shows that their capture can accelerate democratic decline. So how do we distinguish between electoral legitimacy and democratic legitimacy? Third, and I think quite interestingly, the BJP's electoral support and its electoral dominance raises the paradox of illiberalism supported by popular will. This pushes us to consider the tension between electoral majorities and constitutional values. Now, finally, and most interestingly, and I hope we will come back to this, what forms of resistance are viable under these conditions? And I know some of my colleagues have been concerned with these questions, both in the electoral domain as well as in the popular domain. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zoya, for that very enlightening and crisp presentation of the main arguments of your book. And I think you have very nicely brought out the fact that pluralism and democracy are two faces of the same coin. One can't exist without the other. And then the capture of institutions as the major threat. I think we could have an emerging field of comparative study on the capture of institutions in democratic societies. I think we are seeing it in more and more democracies, and it's about time that we exchange notes and learn from each other as to how these things are done. And then a very important point about how you can have privately owned media, corporate media,
Yeah.
but yet government controlled.
I think that's a very interesting point, Balveer, that
Yeah.
we can take forward. Yeah.
I think that's why I was just flagging that for the discussion that's coming now with Dr. Sridharan as the first speaker, followed by, let me not get this wrong again, Ajay, Gudavarthy, and Amir. I think they've all been. Are they going to be introduced one by one? That's another point. I don't know if they have been introduced.
No, sir. You can invite directly to all panelists.
Dr. Sridharan, the director of the UPRC in India. Can I invite you to speak?
Thank you, Professor Balveer, and thank you, Professor Zoya, for inviting me, and all the organizers for inviting me to speak. I understand I have about 15 minutes, which is really not enough to do justice to this very rich volume. I mean, slim volume, but rich in and packed with arguments, analysis, and evidence. In its 6 chapters, preceded by introduction and conclusion, 8 chapters, in which basically the chapters about one is governance, and then 3 chapters, one is on dissent, media control, and curbing public protest. So these 3 chapters actually fit into a sort of set of how civil, as Professor Zoya says, that elections are going on. It's an electoral democracy, but increasingly the usual democratic freedoms are seem to be under challenge. And so these 3 chapters on dissent, on curbing public dissent, media control, and curbing public protest fall into a pattern. And then there is one on rights and duties, the new emphasis in the last decade on duties, and then on dismantling the opposition. So let me begin. I mean, there's no way I can do justice to everything in just a short time, but I'll just make certain selected points. One is to start with Professor Balveer's point that there's a shift towards ideology and identity. This is also a point made by Pradeep Chibber and Rahul Verma in the 2018 book, which I reviewed, about how there's a shift from what Kanchan Chandra earlier called a patronage democracy, where you dish out patronage and you buy votes, to one which is increasingly ideological and identitarian. I'll come to that afterwards, but I wanted to really focus more, broadly speaking, on institutions and how. I mean, my argument is that there were certain institutional weaknesses in which are baked into the constitution and the laws, including colonial inherited laws, which allow or which enable increasing executive control over the polity, including over other institutions. And these I just wanted to point these out a bit, that the constitutional legal framework left loopholes for democratic backsliding into sort of semi-authoritarianism. We saw that earlier in the emergency, but there were some corrective measures taken. The 1973 Basic Structure Doctrine and enunciated by, that is where you cannot amend the basic structure of fundamental rights, federalism, and various other essential features. Then there was the 1993, the collegium system to appoint judges, which gave greater independence and autonomy to the judiciary. Then the executive appointments and then there was the 1994 Bombay judgment, which made the imposition of President's rule under Article 356 much more difficult. That had been done, misused in a big way from the 60s, 70s, 80s into the early 90s. So these were some correctives, but there were still institutional and inherited problems which started well before 2014, which allowed a party so minded to actually try to seek executive dominance over the other institutions and the polity. And that is, the First Amendment to the Constitution, which was basically about zamindari abolition, but also it restricted the freedom of speech, thought, and expression under Article 19(1)(a) by 8 restrictions, 8 what were called reasonable restrictions. And those reasonable restrictions, what was reasonable, what and so on, was left to the hands of the executive to decide that what is really a threat. And the reasons were very broad. Anything from public order, morality, relations with foreign states, all kinds of things can be invoked to curb free speech from 1951. And then there were Articles 2 and 3 about federalism, that states can be broken up, the areas can be changed, the names can be changed, they can be divided, and new states created, whatnot. All this was there. It's there in Article 2 and 3. So even federalism, which is an essential feature of the basic structure, can be modified. And we saw that in 370, which in my view, what is interesting about 370, the abolition, is not about J&K. It is about the implications for all the other states. Because if you can, without assembly being there and a representative of the people being consulted, you can change the boundaries, whatnot, then it means you can impose Article 356 if, say, there could be no stable government in a state, and then make changes in all the other states in principle. And so I found that actually very interesting. Then there is these various laws which leave wide executive discretion, which were inherited. Some colonial, there is sedition law, then the IPC sections 153, 295, 505, which are basically the hate speech laws and the incitement laws, where it is wide discretion. You can, in a situation of democratic erosion, as Professor Zoya puts it, these can be done selectively. I mean, the rule of law, a basic component of democracy, means the impartial application of the law to everybody. Now, if you can selectively, go after some people for hate speech and some other people not, let them go. It's, in a sense, this is nested within a larger framework. It's not just about minorities and majoritarianism. It is also, you can send the ED after some people and not after some people, selectively. So it is the erosion of the rule of law into a sort of selective application, which is into which, within that you can also have majoritarianism, selective treatment of X and Y, or against Y, if they belong to different communities. We are seeing that happening. So these infirmities were already there in the inherited constitutional legal structure, is what I'm pointing out. The UAPA, which is tightened in 2019, that came from 1967. The PMLA came from 2002. And the NIA was the agency created by Home Minister Chidambaram in 2009. So these things were already there and ready for being used by an executive, which, if it was so minded. And in July 2019, when the UAPA and the NIA's powers were tightened, and that time in the Rajya Sabha, the Congress party voted with it, went with it. Then I want to also get back to something which I've been working on for many years and written about, the importance of pre-electoral coalitions. 2014 to 2024 was, I have argued with Adnan Farooqi in a paper in 2014, just after the election, end of 2014, that coalition politics is not over because a particular party has got a majority after 25 years, after 1989 to 2014. We argued that this majority of 2014 and 2019 was based on pre-electoral alliances. That has been very critical. Effective and smart use of pre-electoral alliances state by state has allowed the growth of the BJP and NDA in a big way. So, and even in 2014, out of 282 seats, 57 seats were won in states where there were significant pre-electoral alliances. In 2019, out of 303 seats, 42 seats were won in Maharashtra, Bihar and Punjab, where there were significant pre-electoral alliances, meaning vote transfer from the support base of the allies. So that way, coalition politics didn't go away. It was still there. And you saw it reviving in 2024 with the formation of a big pre-electoral alliance, the India Alliance, which brought the ruling party net down by 63 seats net. They gained in some states. They won Odisha, they increased in Madhya Pradesh, in Assam and so on. But a number of states, especially the three largest states in Lok Sabha, UP, Maharashtra and West Bengal, there was a big erosion which led them net 63 seats down. Now, but pre-electoral alliances were revived, and despite an 8% plus growth rate, a very high growth rate, the ruling party came down in seats because of the effectiveness of pre-electoral alliances. So I think we need to look at that, study that in our system. Pre-electoral alliances can counter even an 8% growth. Now, so I'm making these institutional points that all these constitutional loopholes and existing laws were there which allowed exploitation by a party so minded, if a party so minded came to power. Okay, so I think we are seeing that. And now, in the broader theoretical literature, I mean, Aaron Leiphardt wrote that famous American Political Science Review article in 1996, in which he argued that India has succeeded as a democracy, a stable democracy, despite tremendous diversity of every kind, because it is a power sharing system, what he called a consociational system, a power sharing system. He made this, he posited this continuum between majoritarian and consensus democracies. Consensus, obviously, you can't have. Sorry, am I running out of time? Okay, I'll wind up. I'll just wind up. So, Leiphardt said that majoritarian was a consensus, and he put it at the consensus end. He said India is a consociational democracy because it has a power sharing system, hence it is stable despite diversity. Now, I argued that in something I wrote about 2 decades ago, that it is somewhere in the middle between majoritarianism and consensus. India is a halfway house institutionally. That is, it has majoritarian features and it has consociational power sharing features. It is somewhere in the middle. Now, I just pointed out the various things where it is actually has institutional features which can be exploited to actually centralize and hegemonize. So it is halfway there. Now it is being pulled to one side rather than the other side. And the alternatives are, broader pre-electoral alliances and things like that. Then I'd just like to also just make another point. I mean, a couple of quick points. Rights and duties, a very important chapter in which the emphasis on duties is being pushed, but selectively. You see, duties include, if you read that constitutional part on duties, it includes respecting the composite culture, specifically point made in the Constitution, the words composite culture, our culture is composite. Then it says scientific temper, harmony, all this has to be promoted as part of duties. But these are generally not mentioned at all. Now, dismantling opposition, that chapter, I mean, I just made the points about pre-electoral alliances, that's very difficult. And it depends also on the fact that federalism allows spaces, I mean, geographical spaces where you can have governments of the opposition. Right now, as of we speak today, there are 14 chief ministers of the BJP. There are 6 others who are like Bihar and Andhra, which are formally part of NDA, and others which are de facto, allied to NDA. And there are 8 non-NDA opposition governments. And one BJP CM in Delhi and one NDA CM in Puducherry. So you have a certain spatial diversity which allows space. So it's not, I would not go with VDEM, saying it's an electoral autocracy, although democratic backsliding is there. But I would not go to the extreme. Like, it's not like Erdogan or in Turkey or like Orban in Hungary or like that, so far at least. There is space for, and 2024 election showed that the counter mobilization can be effective. I mean, a broad pre-electoral alliances can be effective. So we are at a somewhat sort of indeterminate point where all the things that Professor Zoya says with a lot of evidence and argument is true. But I don't think it is a hopeless case. I think it's there is space for reversing democratic backsliding. Thank you.
Thank you, Sri. I think you have given us 2 or 3 major issues to reflect on. One, of course, taking the last point that you mentioned, that we haven't crossed the hump. We are not a hopeless case, that we have not moved irreversibly away from democracy. I think that's a point well taken. On the question of electoral alliances and coalitions, you are the most eminent expert on the subject, and so I would not engage you on that front. I would like to just say one thing. In the debate on continuity and change, how much is continuity and where is the change? I think, Shri, in this 75th year of the Constitution, it's all right to point to the weaknesses of the Constitution. it's all right to point to the weaknesses of laws. And let us not also chronologically trace who did what, when, how. The big question that we need to answer is that is there change? Or are we witnessing what we have already witnessed in the past? There were seeds, there were openings, there were possibilities. Were they all used? Okay, to put it very bluntly, we had an emergency of 17 months and then an election, and the people repudiated it. Do we have an undeclared emergency at present? If you compare the emergency of 75 77 to what is the situation, that's why I'm saying, is there a change? Or there is, it's politics as usual, life as usual, everything is normal, nothing is, it's the same constitution, so, and it's the same laws. No laws have been changed, no new acts have been introduced. So I think that question we need to answer in this continuity and change perspective. How much continuity and what is the change? That is something that we'll need to answer at some stage. So now I turn to the second speaker, was Ajay Gudavarthy, who was there a little while ago with a beautiful decor behind him.
I'm very much here, sir.
There you are. Yeah, because I was admiring the decor behind you, and so now there you are. Over to you. It's your turn.
Thank you, Professor Arora, and let me also begin by thanking Vikas and Hemant for this opportunity and organizing this event, and congratulations to Zoya for writing this timely book, which I think chronicles almost all of the important developments since 2014. And I think the way I've read the book is to see it as an opportunity to open up some of the questions that we are confronting with this idea of democratic backsliding. So what I would do is to pick on each of those 5 or 6 chapters Zoya has and try to formulate a few questions that the book does signal towards, and so that we can have further debate and discussion in terms of how does one theorize some of these democratic concerns in the contemporary period. In the introductory chapter, I think, Zoya, you make this link between deprivation and majoritarianism, that there is some link in terms of deprivation, and that growing deprivation often leads to some kind of growing social consent for authoritarian forms of governance. I think partly this formulation historically emerges from the experience of Germany post First World War, and therefore I think we'll have to recalibrate it in the Indian context, whether there is this kind of a straightforward link that deprivation leads to majoritarianism. Because if you look at the consent that the BJP and RSS have, they essentially have a formidable consent from the middle classes, the urban, well-to-do middle and upper middle classes. And there I don't think we are able to see a link between deprivation and support for the authoritarian unconstitutional form of governance that BJP offers. So could we then reformulate it that more than deprivation, it is anxiety that is driving this kind of growing consent, and then one has to then therefore I think make it more complex by arguing what is the link between anxiety and deprivation. I think Zygmunt Bauman, an interesting cultural sociologist, has an interesting formulation in the European context that immigrants raise quite a bit of anxiety among the white Europeans, because they work as some kind of reminders of who you can be or where you can reach that kind of a bare life that Agamben talks about, because they are the ones without rights, without basic resources and basic opportunities. I think in India, we are witnessing a very strange context where the lower end groups, caste and classes and urban poor and the rural landless poor, Congress has done some bit by giving them new opportunities, by giving them some kind of a precarious inclusion and growth. I think especially 2004 to 14, Manmohan Singh's period, with growth around 9 to 10%. I think there has been the stock of 270 million pushed out of abject poverty, but they're precariously located. One of the reports of the IMF says that one big push will push them back into the same abject poverty from where they have come. So I think we have ended up in a context where the poor, the lower end castes and classes are precarious yet highly aspirational, because political democracy has made them highly aspirational. And this aspirational momentum, how real, how unreal, one does not know. It's very, very difficult to pin. But what it has definitely resulted in, it seems to be, I think, a lot of anxiety among the caste Hindu elites, upper middle classes and middle classes, that if this kind of a push-up comes from the bottom up, then there is a loss of privileges for the upper end groups. In fact, Rahul Gandhi made this observation, very interesting observation, that in course of his interaction with some of the villagers somewhere in UP, one of them said that we do not vote for BJP because BJP has allowed Dalits and OBCs to hold their head high and walk in the streets in the villages. Though we know that it has not given a jump start to their material and economic aspirations, but on the question of social democratization, on the question of dignity, on the idea of social equality, I think both political democracy and a centrist party like Congress did well, without all of that necessarily translating to big time economic opportunities and economic mobility. So I see this kind of a combination of precariat aspirations of the lower end social groups, combined with growing anxiety of the higher end social groups, caste Hindus, I think has become a formidable combination for social consent towards BJP. And that's why BJP is able to gain the support of both upper caste Hindus as well as the lower end castes and classes. And I think Hindu, the identity of Hindu as a cultural and a religious identity, I think is an empty category that somehow gives space for both forgetting their caste and class conflicts, but gives some kind of an equivalence to express their own set of anxieties and insecurities. I think that's one big area we need to really explore as to what this democratic backsliding means, is to have that link with the past, that somewhere the centrist growth was a half-hearted growth, and I think it has caused an anomaly between successfully offering social democratization without it translating to economic mobility. So that would be my first offering for your reflection as to how one could kind of reformulate that question. And on the question of representation, though I have written extensively on how Muslims have been eclipsed of their fair share of representation, the drop in the number of MPs, the kind of ticket distribution that has changed. But I would also draw your attention to this very interesting fact that even as representation of the Muslims drops to near nil, BJP is nil, and I think we just have now 4 MPs right now in the parliament, but Muslims are the mainstay of Indian electoral politics. And this is a very strange anomaly. The more they get eclipsed socially and politically, they are at the heart of electoral mobilization. How does one explain this anomaly? That how does BJP succeed? That even as Muslims get eclipsed, they drop on the social development indicators, they somehow seem to remain the primary enemy, quote-unquote enemy, in the eyes of the majority community. How does BJP manage this? I think is something that we should, while as we analyze that, I think we should also take a note of caution that this is not a simple-minded shift to majoritarianism. Otherwise, how do we also explain the great anomalies in the history of Indian democracy? The loss of BJP post-demolition of Babri Masjid in Uttar Pradesh in 1992. Similarly, the loss of BJP in the heart of Ayodhya in the Faizabad constituency in 2024. The loss of margin, the drastic decline in the margin for Mr. Narendra Modi in Varanasi. I think we also simultaneously have these anomalous counter factual stories to look at, that even at one level there is a rise of majoritarianism, but this doesn't seem to be a linear shift, but there is something more happening there in terms of what is the social content of that majoritarianism. On the third aspect, on the question of media, again, I think that's one of the most elaborate chapters you have written in terms of the nature of control, as you say, corporate owned but government controlled. You have gone into all the details, including the story of the news click, of the various news channels that have been controlled. There's a drastic decline in the quality, and we know what media has become like a circus now. But I think one has to also then raise this question that why is alternate media? On one hand, there is a shift from traditional television watching. Now all this new data is showing that lot of viewership is shifting to alternate social media. So what does this mean? That does it mean that people at large are not consenting to these kinds of manufactured stories, which are a priori fixed, which are pretty much premeditated, which are pretty much coverage is linked to a certain kind of a fixed narrative. But as I said, that people are increasingly moving to social media. So this is, I think, another big story we need to really crack. What does this really signify? That there is that it also means that people are able to see through this kind of a monotony that has been created by media coverage through preset narratives, and that it all is not lost. But at the same time, I think we also have the stories of alternate media like The Wire or Caravan having very limited reach. Most of these media's house and their stories are followed by the already converted that we do. Then we need a story whether publishing houses like Wire and Caravan, do they really convert the uninitiated? Do they have a reach among those who are not convinced by a secular narrative? Where does this leave us? That that they are being pushed into a bubble, especially as far as I see, government does not touch those of the scholars, academics who are writing in the English media. They are much more, as far as I can see, cracked down more quickly when it comes to the vernacular media. Therefore, this media is also, I think, a pretty mixed story. That when even as government is cracking down, I think there's a very selective that vernacular media, the selection. And I can tell you, from my experience from the Telugu channels in Telangana, that pretty much it is still very, very open. There is a lot of critical debate in Telugu media against BJP, communal narrative. It's pretty much, it has, I think, regional media in most places have maintained their autonomy. Our sense of media mostly comes from English news dailies, mainstream Hindi channels and English channels. But that's not the entire story. One, there is shift to social media. The other, I think, we have to also understand this, how does the regional media maintain its own autonomy? Is it because they are not controlled by the big corporate medias, or is it because the regional capital sees itself as against the global corporate capital owned by big media houses? I think there is one big story for us to capture there. Then on the question of rights, you have an elaborate chapter on the question of rights, where but India again, has a very, very interesting trajectory of an anomaly between that rights regime in India extensively grew just at the moment when neoliberalism was introduced. The 1990s was both opening up of the market, withdrawal of the state, but it was also a context where extensive right to food, right to work, right to health, RTI, you can name any number of through. But then the catch really is that I think Congress legislated most of these rights through the National Advisory Council rather than through Congress party. I think Congress did not manage to get that image of being a welfarist center-left party, but even though it massive welfarism, and there was some amount of growth in terms of lost because I think it tagged on to this idea of being a neoliberal party and with the withdrawal of welfareism. And of course, there's another anomaly that people have voted for Mr. Narendra Modi, who is much more aggressively neoliberal. So again, this is an anomaly that we need to crack. If people have voted out Congress because of its neoliberal reforms, then how do you explain the return of Mr. Modi in 2019 after having pursued aggressively neoliberal policies from 2014 to 19, then back again for the third term from 2019 to 24 when he's doing pretty much same more aggressively in terms of selling away public sector institutions, privatizing education, withdrawing budgetary allocations to health and education. So that's the other anomaly. And finally, I think your very interesting chapter on protest that you have formulated, especially with the focus on CAA, that how CAA has become one of the largest symbols of protest under the Modi regime, and somewhat compel him to go slow on it. But if one compares CAA with farmers' protest, the difference that I find really is that farmers' movement began with a immediate demand of protection of MSP or converting MSP into a legal right. But over a period in the second and third rounds, farmers' movement really expanded its social vision. It linked the agrarian crisis to corporate development. It linked it to freedom of speech. It linked it to question of control on academic institutions and media. It linked it to question of sovereignty. I think farmers' movement in terms of the narrative and the optics it generated, I think threw up a social question beyond the immediate relevance that it's only that such a movement is only relevant to the farmers. I think my critique of NRC and CAA movement has been that they have failed to generate that kind of a momentum, that somehow it began that way. I think both the movements, I see them having as opposite trajectories. The farmers movement began with a narrow agenda of MSP, went on to expand their social vision. The CAA movement began fairly well, but then gradually I think either the government succeeded or those participating and leading the anti-CAA movements failed to generate an optics where it then condensed into some kind of a agenda for Muslims alone, that rather than it's a question of citizenship, constitution, democracy, inclusivity, that it became solely the question of Muslims. And that's how I think the movement somehow fell out of the larger debate of the majority community. So I think this also would raise us larger questions about political mobilization, that social movements today perhaps have to connect a range of issues, that they cannot afford to be single based issues. And that would also raise questions in terms of internal reforms within movement. I think that is where the BJP's real premium is, that they kind of harp on the fault lines within these social movements for counter mobilization. So I think the CAA kind of movements will have to then bring up questions of fault lines within Muslim community, social reform, so on and so forth. And farmers movement did that fairly well. That on the second and third stage linked them to the question of Dalits, linked them to the question of women, internal reforms within the Jat-led farmers movement. I think those, unless those movements don't have that kind of a new approach to counter social mobilization, then it's very easy for the government to kind of typify them as a Muslim or a sectoral kind of social struggles, which then do not gain larger social consent. With that, I'll stop and congratulate Zoya again for this book.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ajay. That was a very useful and wide-ranging engagement with the book that we are looking at. And I think you have tried to map and track changes in very different fields, as well as you have pointed out where protest movements work and where they end up in a cul-de-sac and fritter away. I would like to submit to you just one point because there are so many, and I'm sure Zoya will deal with them. Your emphasis on anxiety that you began with, it's an important point. Anxiety as a political factor has existed. The fear of losing your class and sinking into a lower class, the economic precarity, these are all things that we have seen as societies evolve, change economically. I am asking you to look at another correlate of anxiety, which is fear. Who is afraid? That is an indices. I mean, that particular, the fear index, if you apply it to different phases, you will find it gives you different results. And I think it is important to look beyond anxiety to fear, which is an aggravated form of anxiety, because you are not only afraid of your losing your economic status, but losing your life, losing your all that you have. So just look into that. I think periods can be differentiated. And again, I come back to the same thing. Continuity and change. It's nice to map continuity. But where lies the change? I'm struggling with that problem. Is that I have to answer the question, is it the same as what it was, or is it different? And that is something which there are no easy answers. So with that, we turn to the third discussant, third panelist, Dr. Amir Ali, also from CPS JNU. This is practically a mini faculty meeting of the CPS.
Faculty meeting.
Amir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Arora. Thank you.
We are missing faculty meetings. We've organized one now.
Yeah, organized.
Well, I can say that both of me and Ajay are certainly missing you, Professor Hasan and Professor Arora. We were students when we were students. You, of course, are our teachers, and then, of course, we were honored to be your colleagues. But we are certainly missing you.
Thank you.
So, I'd like to thank Vikas and Hemant also for asking me to be part of this, and also congratulations, Professor Hasan, for writing this book. This is, I think, the second book in quick succession of yours that I've read. I've also read and reviewed the one on When the People Rise and Protest on the Shaheen protests. So I think previous speakers have very ably identified the core of this very slim and very important book, which are Dissent, the whole question of media capture, and as Professor Hasan said, corporate owned but government control. I think that's a very important anomaly, almost an oxymoron for us to think about. Also, the question of rights and duties, the fact that the UPA era of those 10 years, 2004 to 14, saw a series and succession of rights-based legislations. And today we have a certain kind of an emphasis on duties where the government is basically turning on people and saying, well, you fulfill your duties first. Kartavya Path, for example, Rajpath has become Kartavya Path. That's just a symbolic aspect of that. And of course, the whole question of the evisceration of the opposition. So what I'm going to do is just confine myself to the first two, dissent and media, because a lot of people have already spoken about that, and make a few general points where about the book, specifically to do with dissent. Now, I mean, the crackdown on dissent is, to be honest, quite dramatic and spectacular. I mean, people like me who grew up in the 80s always had this feeling that those old days of, I have no memories of the emergency. I was just too young to have any memories. But we always thought that those days are gone. They'll never come back. And as Professor Arora was saying, that there is a kind of an undeclared emergency right now. in terms of the way that this country is being run. Now, the point that I want to make about dissent, and this point does not hold just for India, but is something that holds for across the world right now, the US, the UK, all those bastions of liberal democracy that we thought were unshakable. I think essentially what we've had is that to the extent that dissent was inane, that it didn't really rock the boat too much, it was acceptable and showcased. Now what we see is a certain kind of a very vicious crackdown on dissent, because even the slightest hint of dissent is being seen as something which is problematic, which tells us the very nervous times that we live in. So despite this proclamation of Mazboot Sarkars, as this government tries to talk about all the time, I think these Mazboot Sarkars are very, very nervous even at the slightest sign of dissent, which explains the way that they will, for example, hammer and tongs will go away at any form of protest. So Ajay made the point about the Shaheen Bagh CA protests and the very vicious manner in which the government came down, I think, to my mind, is a sign of this nervousness on the part of the government. Now, it's quite an irony that a government which has such a huge majority, which has enjoyed huge majorities, which has such a strong man as its leader, as many countries in the world are led by by many strong men. That would include Turkey, would include the US right now, would include the UK when Boris Johnson was there, Mr. Erdogan in Turkey. The fact that there is a remarkable intolerance and signs of nervousness is something that we really need to think about. And it tells us something in terms of how dissent has, we've left that earlier stage of dissent behind, where dissent was championed and showcased, to a point where dissent is not tolerated anymore. Now, this brings me to the media. Now, I go back to, I think, the crucial hinge point in everything that we are experiencing. Of course, your book focuses on the 11 years, 2014, the coming of the Modi government, and the fact that it continues today and shows no signs of going away. I think this moment was inaugurated in the 2011 Anna movement, and the way the media was brought in and instrumentally used to create this idea that there's a certain kind of corruption that people have to really, really do something about. It created a crusade against corruption. That's one thing I can say. And to be honest, I was a younger faculty member around that time. I'd recently joined CPS, and I was quite horrified to see the way in which people were worked up about corruption. Today in the newspaper, there was a report that the ED has closed the case on the Commonwealth Games scam. I mean, there's something which is drummed up as being the corruption of the corrupt case of the century. Pales into insignificance in terms of what we are witnessing today. Now, what really I was worried about, and I always bring this anxiety up, and I often share this with Ajay every time we talk about this, is the way that many people were, kind of led along with this whole thing. This naive belief that somehow that particular moment and movement against corruption could somehow deepen democracy. Now, what we have seen is the very disappearing of democracy altogether. I think that moment inaugurated this. I still remember, and I still, use this as my vindictive moment with my friends who I disagreed with. I kept telling them, what this is going to do. It's going to pave the way for Modi. So, in the Urdu that I sometimes speak with friends, I say, Rasta hamvar kar raha Modi ka. It's paving the way for Mr. Modi. And I think that's exactly what happened. And I think that many political scientists were not really aware of where exactly we were being led. In this belief that somehow democracy would be deepened. Let me make one more point, which I thought the book missed. I mean, the point that I thought you kept making was the emergency. But let me bring up another instance in which the media was sought to be controlled. This is the Rajiv Gandhi government in 1988, which passed a defamation bill because it was very troubled by, especially the reporting by the Indian Express, and Arun Shourie was the editor around that time, the series of investigative reports. Now, that was a bill that the Rajiv Gandhi government had to take back. Now, I think that would be a sign of the different times that we are living in right now. Of course, the Modi government did do a U-turn on the farmers' protests, which has a separate set of issues. But what I'm trying to bring up here is that just to get a sense, and this especially would be useful for our young research scholars who would have no memories of those times. Many of them would not have even been born back in 1988. But what I'm trying to bring up here is that it's just an indicator of how things have changed, how far we have gone, how perhaps irredeemable the position may be. That back in 1988, when Rajiv Gandhi tried to muzzle the press came together and made sure, and civil society as well, that this was a legislation that had to be brought back. And I think that would be a useful indicator. Of course, we keep talking about the emergency. I'm not denying that it is an important indicator, but I'm just urging that this particular aspect of the 1988 defamation bill should be kept in mind when we talk about issues of this kind, the way that media has been behaving. Now, the media has been behaving atrociously. It's abysmal in terms of the behavior. I just want to make one quick point in terms of how serious the behavior of the media is. Now, in 2022, after the Nupur Sharma incident, when Nupur Sharma made comments about the Prophet Muhammad on live television, the Editors Guild came up with a release where it made the comparison between Indian television journalism and Radio Rwanda. Now, Radio Rwanda was the radio station that broadcast hate-filled rhetoric against the members of the Tutsi community, and we all know what happened in 1994 after that, the infamous Rwandan genocide. Now, that's just a level of how serious things are. I am pretty much one of those people who takes a very bleak view of things. I hope I'm proved wrong. But I'm really worried about the level of hatred that is being spewed. I'll just give you one example of this. Yesterday on campus, I was getting some printouts, photocopies and other printouts that I needed. Now, the person who owns the Xerox shop, the YouTube station was playing. I asked him whether this was a news channel. He said, no, it's not a news channel. It was a YouTube channel. Now, this belongs to someone called Major Raghav Arya, Vikas Arya or Raghav Arya, if I'm not wrong. Now, the kind of hateful things that this man was saying made me extremely disturbed. And when the person saw that I was very disturbed, he had the courtesy to switch it off. Now, all that I'm saying is this venom that is being spewed, I have a great deal of fear that this will have some very, very harmful consequences for the body politic, which to my mind is now irredeemable. Now, this brings me to a point where I would take slight issue with you because you seem to express a certain kind of optimism about Indian democracy and the fact that it's resilient and it'll bounce back. I don't think so. I hope I'm wrong. Again, I hope, 5 years, 10 years down the line, we can all get together and say, oh, I was just wrong. So I hope I'm wrong. Now, I'm saying this for a reason. I'm saying this for the reason because the crisis of Indian democracy right now cannot be understood in isolation. What we are witnessing is a crisis of democracy across the world, whether it's the US or the UK or many other countries. I mean, thankfully, Canada had the good sense to elect Mark Carney, a liberal prime minister. But that doesn't buck the trend. Now, the larger point that I'm making here is that in the crisis of liberal democracy, we are gradually moving towards something that the Israeli political scientist Sami Smuha calls an ethnic democracy. Now, this has happened because I think, Professor Hasan, you did make this point, that the bandwidth of Indian nationalism is narrowing from an earlier cosmopolitan, civic, liberal nationalism to a very constricted ethnic nationalism. Now, in my understanding, the consequences of this will be extremely serious. I don't think there's any kind of a going back. I'm going to make one final point, which is to do again with a kind of a global conjuncture that I see right now. The crisis of Indian democracy is caught up in a particular global conjuncture. Now, that global conjuncture is a crisis of democracy itself, liberal democracy. Now, this liberal democracy was inaugurated after the Second World War. And I think we are witnessing the kind of termination of a particular world order. I mean, as we speak, we can perhaps sense a whole world order that is crumbling down. I mean, the rules-based international order, as we called it, that was created by the Bretton Woods institutions in 1944, 1945, the UN, the Geneva Conventions, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, all of that is coming crashing down at this moment. Now, this is where I want to express my extreme concern about where we are in India right now. We are not on the side of countries like, let's say, the plurinational state of Bolivia, whose representative I was hearing a little while ago in the International Court of Justice hearings against Israel. It's very unfortunate that in this country, there is a remarkable expression of admiration for a country like Israel, which is pretty much the international pariah right now. I mean, you just watch those 5 days. Today was the third day of the hearings at the International Court of Justice. The only two countries that are speaking in favor of Israel are the US and Hungary, and for obvious reasons. Now, this is really my point. I think over the next 5-6 years, we are going to see a certain kind of a larger global turbulence, where we see a whole world order being redefined. Now, what will come out of this? No one knows. I hope that a certain stronger notion of democracy comes out of this, but there's no going back to the kind of liberal democracy that many of us were very familiar with. And therefore, for political scientists, especially younger research scholars, what I would counsel would be a much, much more bolder, a more ambitious conceptualization and theorization of democracy. Because the democracy that we are familiar with was a democracy that was created along with the world order established after the Second World War. Again, the point I'm making is that world order is crumbling right in front of us. What we need to think about is how democracy can be sufficiently strengthened, because liberal democracy was a fragile thing. it didn't take too much time for it to be dismantled in the way that it is being dismantled. I mean, all of us have been shocked by how quickly, not just Indian democracy has been unraveling, but I mean, surprise of all surprises, what is happening in the US right now. So that would be, one final point that I want to make, and this is crucial because a lot will depend on this. Many of us will be following, I think, will be riveted by the Waqf bill. Now, clearly the government was on the back foot. The Attorney General really had no response to it at all. The next hearing, I think, is on the 4th of May. I think that in terms of how politics in this country will progress, will be pretty much in terms of what will happen to the Waqf bill. Now, we all know that when the government was on the back foot on that front. But, let us see, let us hope for the best. But I tend to be a pretty pessimistic person, and there are reasons for that pessimism that I laid out in terms of what I see this kind of a larger transformation of the global era. And any transformation of the global order is never an easy set of process. Transition is always a difficult one. With that, I'll stop and congratulate Professor Hasan once again for undertaking this project of writing this book.
Thank you. Thank you, Amir. That was very interesting, and thank you for widening the scope and the context, putting it in a comparative global perspective, regardless of whether there are reasons for pessimism or optimism. I think we need to situate ourselves in this broader framework. One or two points that I would mention. One is that you asked why the government is nervous. I think that was one of the things, is that what surprises you is that it should be confident, and its harshness on dissent and its harshness on its opponents is out of character. Or needless, if I might sum up, is that it's unjustified. There's no reason. So I think that is in itself a question to be answered, because obviously it is not the fear of losing a parliamentary majority, which it has, but a wider source of nervousness which we need to interrogate. Is that what is it that makes the government nervous? The second thing that I would draw attention to is you talked about levels of hatred. I would again link it up to the anxiety and fear that came up earlier. And we need to look at these societal occurrences, but they're not just societal, they are clearly political. You remember the work of Paul Brass on the manufacture of riots, and we have plenty of evidence on how hatred and violence and fear can be fabricated at will. So that is another issue that we continue to work on. The final point that I take from your presentation is very interesting, is that the demolition of democratic institutions, we can draw no comfort from the fact that it is a global phenomenon. I think these are bound to be reversed. So therefore, I'm not as pessimistic as you are. You brushed Canada aside, you brushed Mexico aside. I say, yes, that is how resistance is built up, and I'm sure there will be other examples. So we need to continue to look at the sources of resilience and the sources of strength in our systems, and also, as you rightly put it, the causes for nervousness, anxiety, fear. I have also talked about that. I think those are important political sentiments and emotions which need to be factored in. No, Zoya, would you like to, at this stage, intervene before we open the discussion to the floor and respond to the comments that have been made so far?
The comments that have been made are so important, significant, and interesting. I'm not sure whether I'm really up to addressing all of them, but I do think that there are 2 or 3 issues that have emerged in the course of the 4 comments, including yours, Balveer. And I think one of the central issues that interests me and which emerges from this discussion is the whole issue of continuity and discontinuity. I think that is really a key issue that we have to grapple with. Now, clearly there is a difference of opinion on this, because what Sridharan presented was an argument that there is an institutional architecture that was in place, and the loopholes in that architecture have been very ably exploited by the present regime. But the point is precisely this, that that institutional architecture existed, but it was not exploited in the way in which it has been exploited now, producing, therefore, a very different kind of situation. And secondly, I think the whole point really is, where are we going to place emphasis? Are we going to place emphasis on continuity, that this has happened before? And because if we insist on this, then there is nothing to worry about. Because why are we worrying about what is happening today? We are worrying about what is happening today is because what is happening today hasn't happened before, and also because the global context and the Indian context is very different today. And I think to insist on continuity in a way is letting the regime off the hook, because then that is really my major concern. Whereas I think all of us would agree that there is so much that is happening. I'm not even at the moment raising the whole question of their attitude towards minorities, on which I think all of us would agree. But beyond minorities, there is so much that is happening. What is being put in place is a new political system, which is majoritarian, authoritarian. I would agree with Sridharan when he says that we should not declare this to be an electoral autocracy, but it is political authoritarianism combined with majoritarianism. So I think we have to recognize that this is a different political system, and I'm afraid we do not recognize the difference because we focus so much on elections, and we focus so much on electoral politics and not on political processes, on the changes that are taking place. So I think that is one issue which is really at the heart of what we have been discussing. The second, in other words, what I'm saying is that the discontinuity is greater than continuity, and let us not underestimate the change, because if we underestimate the change, we are letting the BJP off the hook. The second point about anxiety, I think, is a very interesting one, and I think Balveer added a very interesting dimension by suggesting that it's not just anxiety, because anxiety is, Ajay, a fairly common feature in right-wing regimes. For example, and the very fact that the poor and the deprived often end up supporting right-wing regimes is again not unique to India. Look at the working class and the kind of support that the American working class has extended to Trump. And in fact, working class have really moved from the Democrats to the Republicans, and even blacks, for example, large section of immigrants, Spanish immigrants, even though one Republican said that Spanish immigrants are garbage floating in the ocean, and yet we know that very large number of Spanish immigrants voted for Trump, as indeed large section of blacks voted for Trump. Now, it is interesting that in India, that phenomena has not yet happened, and I think that you were rightly pointing this out, Ajay, and that is that, but you were putting it somewhat differently. You were making the point that even though there is this huge underrepresentation of Muslims, and yet they're at the center of electoral politics. But that's one of the great. But you see, the point is that BJP's whole political strategy, which started with Gujarat, was to demonstrate, and it has done so quite effectively, that they can win elections without Muslim support, and therefore they don't need to give tickets to Muslims. But I think the point about Ayodhya is really very, very interesting and fascinating, that BJP lost in Ayodhya, and I think we still don't really have a really good explanation of why that happened. Of course, it's a combination of caste and class. There, maybe the whole, very large number of issues that contributed to it. But that is interesting, and I think again the point about media is also quite interesting. That you have that the media is corporate owned, but government control, and yet there is variety in the media. And you were raising, somebody raised the point about the wire. Is the wire able to convince those who are on the other side? But I think that apart, I would say wire is a very significant record of dissent. And just that itself is so important that I would say that the alternative media is very, very important. So I think finally, I would say that one of the big issues really, which Balveer flagged off right in the beginning in his introductory comments, and that is about neoliberalism. And that point has been made later as well, that ostensibly the UPA lost, UPA and the Congress has declined because of neoliberalism, but you've ended up with a regime which is even more neoliberal. So there is a paradox that needs to be explained. But I think the paradox simply can be explained that the difference between, let us say, the Congress and the BJP is that Congress was neoliberalism plus welfare, whereas BJP is neoliberalism plus Hindutva. I think that is the difference between these two regimes. So I think eventually, really, the big issue that confronts India and indeed the world today is the huge growth in inequality. Perhaps it is being said, for example, that in the United States, the levels of inequality have been, as has been said about India by the Thomas Piketty World Equality Lab and so on, that India hasn't been as unequal for a century as it is today. And I was reading something by George Monbiot in the Guardian Weekly, a very, very interesting essay that I would like to draw your attention and also Balveer's attention, because he raised this whole issue of neoliberalism. He makes the point that what has been said about India, that inequality in the US today is greater for almost for 100 years, the US has not been as unequal as it is today. So I think this is really inequality is the big issue of our time. Now, of course, there are different kinds of inequalities, and but economic inequality is clearly a very central issue that needs to be addressed. And I leave it at that. I mean, there are still so many interesting and important issues that have been addressed in this discussion that I hope I'll have the time to come back to, or we will have another occasion to talk about it, because I think Balveer has, in his comments after each of the speakers, really identified some of the central issues that emerge not just from my book, but really issues that we need to address, issues which are really important in this conjuncture.
Thank you very much, Zoya. I think you've summed up the gist of the debate and the discussion very nicely, and leaving us with this major concern and the linkages between inequality and anxiety and fear. I think we need to look at that. Now we are going to open the floor to discussion, and I would like some help from the organizers, because I'm not very good at multitasking and noticing hands and reading out questions. So somebody has to come forward. I did notice one or two hands, but I don't know where they went.
But
So,
I'm just going to add one point to Amir's comments, where,
Yes.
of course, as is in a way his approach, he is not so optimistic. I mean, of course, given what we are facing, there are grounds to be pessimistic. But I think Amir was quite right in pointing out, I mean, while there are pockets of resistance, and for example, the hands-off movement and the hands-off protests in the US in the last 2 or 3 weeks really are grounds for hope. But I would say, well, the Canadian election results, as Balveer pointed out, but I would say our own 2024 elections is in many ways a turning point, because I think it does hint at a crack in the populist facade and a widening sort of discontent with BJP's economic and political record. I mean, BJP suffered a political rebuff. And I think one of the interesting things that emerges, which I think Sridharan was commenting upon, and of course, as Balveer pointed out, he's an expert in this, is the opposition alliances. And clearly, it was opposition unity in the Lok Sabha elections, which played a very important part. And in a way, I think there lies the hope that at least in the electoral domain, if there is greater opposition unity, it is possible to take on the right. My point really is that, that the dominance of the right is not cast in stone. It can be challenged, and indeed it is being challenged. I would say even the French results and even the defeat of the Conservative Party in Britain, or now the Canadian election, they're all in a way building blocks of change.
I think I'm with you in trying to cheer up Amir. I know where he comes from, and I think his pessimism is a little infectious. I would differ on the French results. The French are in a bad way also with what is happening. But I think the overall thing is to look at the few areas of strength, the few institutions that resist, and the few pointers that we have of how democracies claw their way back.
Yeah.
And I think we see it all the time. They go down, then they come up again. And so let's keep looking at that. Now, I come back to the questions. I can see one hand, Rakesh Yadav.
Sir,
Rakesh Yadav has raised his hand. So I can call on him, but I again urge someone to take over this.
yes, sir. Yes, sir. Dr. Subhangi will conduct, sir.
Yes, sir.
Over
Yes,
to
sir.
you, Subhangi. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Shubhangi,
Uh,
yes. So you're there.
Thank you, sir.
I have called on Rakesh Yadav. Rakesh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sir, I can hear.
Rakesh Yadav, please ask your question.
Ma'am, so my question is that there is a lively discourse going on regarding the departure.
Rakesh ji, your voice is not clear.
Okay. So, am I audible now?
Now you are audible, but your voice is not clear.
Yes. There is lively discourse going on regarding ending the colonial legacy, but still sedition law is still prevalent in India. Although various democratic countries such as USA, UK, and New Zealand have abolished that sedition law. So I would urge honorable speakers to throw some light on it. Thank you.
Okay, noted. Sedition law, and well, you can take on all the laws that we have inherited from colonial times and whether they need a revamp or they need to be just renamed and retained. You see, that also happens. Next question, Shubhangi, who do you see?
Yes, sir. Sana Abrar wants to ask, what do you see as the most significant consequences of the decline in autonomy of democratic institutions?
Noted. I think we'll take 3 or 4 questions
Yes,
and then
Rifa, last
Okay.
Rifa. Please, Rifa.
Rifa, yes.
Please unmute, Rifa. Please unmute.
You need to, there you are.
Am I audible?
Yes.
A very warm good evening to all the professors here, the eminent dignitaries. Professor Zoya Hasan, ma'am, I really like to congratulate you on an incredible work that you have done on democracy and majoritarianism. Ma'am, undoubtedly, it's a need of the hour, and as said by Antonio Gramsci, that we have to maintain an intellectual hegemony in order to forecast the pessimistic side, as done by Amir Ali sir. Which was not pessimistic, rather it is optimistic, because as I am seeing the present scenario, we can say that the present regime is moving from majoritarianism and multiculturalism more towards conservatism, right? So I think that sir has delivered a very optimistic lecture, and I really appreciate it as a research scholar. I'm also a research scholar in the Department of Political Science, Aligarh Muslim University. And ma'am, Professor Zoya Hasan, Balveer Arora sir, you both have delivered that your discussion has been really an exemplary discussion you people have done so far. And my question is from Zoya Hasan ma'am regarding her book that is on democracy. Ma'am, my question is that how can media promote more nuanced and balanced reporting to reduce polarization? As nowadays we can often tolerate, I can say tolerate, because we often tolerate the priest discussions and things like which are more based on religion, rather on the development and the progress of the country. So what is your stand on the role of media in disturbing the secular fabric of the country? So Balveer sir, kindly edify. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rifada, and I think your question is well taken. I think we've understood. And
Okay, thank you so much.
I will come back to the answers. I think we'll take one more question.
Okay, sir.
If there is,
Aisha,
otherwise.
yes, sir. Question is, in the chat box. Aisha Jamir wants to ask, what impact has the political control of media had on factual reporting and public debate in India?
Right. I think the fate of the media or the plight of the media is a matter of concern. To use Ajay's word, a matter of anxiety in the amongst a lot of those who are raising questions. Would Ajay like to say something on the media, because there's this question of talking to the converted, and what value do those who still manage to strike a different tone, what value does it have for democracy? Because it doesn't get you votes, if that is the question.
Yeah, I think that is the real concern. One, that it enters into a bubble. The channels like Caravan, Wire, NewsClick are watched and followed by niche audience who already have. So I think it galvanizes those who are already converted, I think, and maybe gives them a sense of hope. Those who are very pessimistic, like Amir, would get some
Everyone
hope.
looks at Amir when the word is
Whenever pessimism comes, I think Amir, so these alternate channels, I think to that far they do. But beyond that, either in initiating, converting the uninitiated, or even some of the social mobilizations like the farmers movement was a successful movement, but it failed in electoral process. Soon after the movement, look at the results in UP. Even in Lakhimpur Kera, where the farmers were mowed down, all the 7 assembly seats were won by the BJP. So there is something for us to really think in terms of how media, social mobilization, none of this is really converting into the electoral. What is that happens, that process, how it gets mediated? Perhaps Zoya would want to add to this as to what she feels. And this has generally been the trajectory of social activists. Look at Medha Patkar. She, Irom Sharmila in Manipur, who was on strike for 16 years, force-fed. She won 200 seats, 200 votes. Medha Patkar got about 2,000 votes. So I think social activists who are otherwise respected for their social activism, electorally, I think that's also one major challenge we are facing, which also gets transferred to challenge of the opposition parties.
I think that's true. Zoya, would you like to say something at this stage, and then we'll
No,
go?
I think
Or any
let's
of the
take,
other panelists, just let me know. Zoya, yes, yours.
no, I think it'll be nice to hear from others, because if there are other questions.
Okay, yeah. So we move to the next round of questions. I think the points have been noted, and who do we have? Shubhangi is. Again, come back to you, because I want to hear what other questions are there.
I request participants, if you have any queries, you can ask.
I think if there are none in the chat box while we wait for.
Rohit Jha, I think you want to ask something. Rohit Jha.
Rohit, where is Rohit? I'm waiting.
Are you there, Rohit?
No, the issue that I think is not just.
He said no
Yes, is he
question.
there? Is he?
No.
No, he says no question.
No.
He doesn't have a question.
So I think what I'll do then is to ask each of the panelists to make their concluding comments. And we'll begin with Dr. Sridharan, who has to tell us whether a constitutional dictatorship is better than an unconstitutional dictatorship.
Uh, Thank you, Balveer. I just wanted to, Zoya, I think maybe slightly misunderstood my whole emphasis that I'm emphasizing continuity. My point was that I mean, what happened after 2014 in the last 10 years is a significant departure from the earlier political behavior and practice of any earlier governments. Now, what I was saying was my point was that they are managing to do this without changing the constitution or the laws in any major way. That means the constitution or the laws allow them to do this majoritarian politics without any major amendment. So I was not saying that I was not letting them off the hook. I mean, I said yes, okay. I don't go so far as electoral autocracy. We are not a hopeless case, but it is definitely backsliding illiberalism. But it's being done without any major constitutional amendment or changes in the laws, which means they allow that. I could also add, about the university statutes. This is Nirja Jayal has written. The university statutes are worded in a way which allow interference in the way that we are seeing now about academic freedom and so on. So things are being done within the system, but I'm not saying that. I mean, it's a departure, total departure from what's happened earlier. It is definitely backsliding in illiberalism. I've written this in various places. So that was my point. I also like to add that a couple of more things we need to focus on institutionally. One is the judiciary and its inaction or very slow action. And this needs analysis. And also the Rajya Sabha. They've not had a majority up there, but they are passing things, getting things through, and that's with allies. So how do they do that? So these are two institutional things we need to look at more, I think, in terms of how they are able to do things. And about the whole thing about identity and all that, what the study I've done of the Lokniti survey data and the Pew data, which is not election linked, is that there is a broad moderate spectrum in India. I mean, the 37-36% vote share doesn't reflect a sort of hard ideology. Only about half of that is hard ideology from my analysis of the Lokniti data and what I've written on 2014 and 2019 and on 2024. About half of it is voting for the BJP for all kinds of other reasons. Everything from Labharthis to, left liberal at all, but moderate or basically reasonable minded is what comes out from the combination of the Lokniti and Pew survey data. No time to go into detail now, but that's so I have a somewhat less pessimistic in the sense that people are not going to stick their necks out and speak out for minorities, but they are not going to go along. I've had dinner with people with big donors to the BJP who privately at dinner say we don't agree with the policy on Muslims. This is said to me. And so, but because the political economy of such, the government is so powerful, you need all kinds of clearances. You can't, do well in business unless you have, at least you don't offend the government, even if you're not actively with them. So people fall in line. I mean, without necessarily ideologically going across to the other side.
Right.
So I see more hope. I don't see India as a lost case.
I think well said. Those are famous last words. I think the Shri, I would just say that there are phases in the lives of institutions as in the lives of democracies. And I am slowly coming around to the idea that what ultimately matters is the system, the resilience of checks and balances. We are seeing this in the United States, and we are seeing perhaps the opposite in the case you pointed to the Rajya Sabha. It doesn't like you pointed to how there is compliance and caving in. So ultimately the checks on the executive is the key. All constitutions allow you a lot of things, but not all democratically elected leaders use those possibilities to try and subvert democracy. So I think I'm glad you have nuanced your position, and thank you for that. Now I turn to Ajay, if he is still there. but maybe, yes. Ajay, would you like to make some concluding remarks?
No, I think we have had a very fruitful discussion, except to say this, that where would democracy head would depend on the institutions, but also I think on the social configuration and types of new social mobilization. So in my own writings, I felt that this is also a moment of great possibilities, that we might be seeing democracy in a very, very different shape from the way we have understood and the kind of liberal democracy that we are comfortable with. But I think we might be moving to something like a populist democracy, that where there is more space for popular voices, which at times might be very illiberal. But nevertheless, I think it continues to signify a certain kind of democratic voice. So I think we should keep our options open in terms of newer forms of theorization.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a very useful reminder of the importance of popular movements, protest movements, mobilization. Democracy doesn't survive only on institutions, as in one's case, but ultimately, when it is threatened, one looks to the resilience of the institutions which have been put in place. Amir Ali, are you a little more optimistic? Or?
No, I mean, I'm really worried about my pessimism now. It's very, my pessimistic reputation precedes me everywhere these days. So I should do something about it. Some of my students tell me that my classes are very depressing. So anyway, someone talked about Gramsci. So let me quote Gramsci. I think Rifa talked about Gramsci. So pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will. So at the end of it, there's this kind of a pessimism. The optimism is still there. We shall prevail and we shall overcome. But I've got 3 points to make. Firstly, about the 2024 elections, which many of us were enthused by, but I don't see that as having acted as a significant break on the government's authoritarian impulses. And most disappointingly, the fact that two key allies, Naidu and Nitish Kumar, did not really stand up when the Waqf bill issue came up. So that's, again, sorry, my pessimistic strain continuing. Secondly, the range of countries across the world. Canada, of course, was very, it was promising. One of the reasons why Mark Carney won well, it wasn't an emphatic victory, but a lot of it had to do with Mr. Trump's rhetoric, because the Conservatives under Pierre Poilievre, I think, had the possibility of coming back. Let me say something quickly about the UK, because I'm such a keen observer of UK politics. This Labour government, I think, is the most atrocious Labour government that has ever been. It's far worse than Tony Blair's government. I mean, if Blair was bad, this is much worse.
Yeah.
I mean, after the Arora, you flagged this, and Professor Zoya Hasan also made this point. I think it's important to dwell on this just quickly. Now, yes, the inequality lab talked about the billionaire Raj. I have recently read a historian from Stanford, Walter Scheidel, who I would recommend to a lot of people, because he's making again, I'm very sorry about this, very pessimistic point, because the point he's making is that he looks at inequality across human history. And the point he's making is, right now in the 21st century, the levels of inequality have perhaps never ever been experienced across human history. Now, his point is that every time levels of inequality of this kind are witnessed, the horsemen of the apocalypse intervening who act as the great leveler, right, of the book, the great leveler. Now, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse that he talks about are pandemics, which we have witnessed and which we may see more of, state failure, civil war. So this is the kind of situation that perhaps we may be witnessing in terms of the severe dislocation. So I hope this doesn't happen, but I'm just suggesting that this is the kind of future which is pretty dystopic in terms of what political theory will have to confront and contend with. So the inequality that we are witnessing will not be an inequality that will be able to be managed through the electoral process, but will give rise to consequences and dislocations which are far more severe than anything that we are normally used to. So that's the point about inequality that I wanted to make.
Okay. Apocalypse now, Zoya, is it during our lifetime?
Well, I hope not. I hope not. As it is, the war clouds are raining over us, so let's hope good sense will prevail there as well. I just want to make, actually, whatever I needed to say has already been said. But let me just very quickly mention 3 or 4 points, even at the cost of repeating what others have said and what I might have also said. I think the point, the conclusion that I draw from this discussion is that there is a great deal of discontinuity. There may be continuity as far as the institutional architecture is concerned, but I think the point is not the institutional architecture or the point that the loopholes, institutional loopholes or constitutional loopholes existed. I think the point is the substance of institutions. The point is the functioning of institutions, not the overall sort of legal structure, but the way in which they function. Now, are we therefore going to blame the fact that that such a structure existed, or are we going to really focus on the way in which it is functioning? And I would say that we should really as a student of political process, I would say that what really matters is the process and the functioning of institutions that is vastly different. Secondly, I think, if you're talking about academic, if you're talking of universities and we're talking of intolerance in universities, I think the fact is, are we in a position to deny that there is an anti-intellectualism which is at the core of the approach of the regime towards universities? Isn't there a certain anti-intellectualism which is again a feature of right-wing regimes? Look at what is happening in the US. Look at the way in which Trump is treating universities. Look at the way in which what he's doing to Harvard, to Columbia, to Princeton, and so on and so forth. Did you ever imagine that diversity would be opposed in the way in which it is being opposed in the United States? So I think the point, therefore, is that I think regardless of can we also deny that the level of intolerance that exists in universities in India today did not exist in the past, which is not to say that there was no intolerance in state universities, but the scale is very different, both qualitatively and quantitatively. So my point is that the point is not that there was a certain legal wherewithal, and all that is now being done is that this government is using it. But the point is that this government is using it, and previous governments did not do so. And I think finally, a very interesting point is about the 2024 elections. How do we look at the 2024 elections? Apart from the fact that perhaps we still don't really have a very satisfactory explanation of why BJP won 240 and not 300, leave alone 350 or 400, but that it did not even get 272 or 300. I think that, we don't have a satisfactory explanation, but the very fact that it did not win is important. But even more important is the point that Amir was making, that 240 has not constrained the executive, it has not constrained the government. And I think that is really the answer to the question of continuity and discontinuity. That is to say, the very fact that this government has not been constrained by a reduction in the number of its seats demonstrate that this is a very different regime. And I think finally, what the point that was made right in the beginning by Balveer, that ideology is alive and kicking, and we need go no further than India to see the importance of ideology. And I think I want to really end with this rather sad point, which is to talk about how different we are. In the context of of what has happened in the past week in Kashmir, there have been protests by the Indian diaspora in different countries, particularly in Britain and in the US. And there were demonstrations in front of the Indian High Commission, in front of the Pakistan High Commission in the past few days. And it was so sad to see that the Indian protesters were actually carrying an Israeli flag. Whereas that was not the case with our neighbor. That is, the protesters from the neighboring country were actually holding Palestinian flags. And the Indian protesters, and they were fighting, and the kind of language and abuse that was on display over there. I think we have come a long way from what our India was until 10 or 15 years ago. And I think we all were fortunate to be living in that India. And unfortunately, we are in a very different situation today. And I really thought that this demonstration in London 2 or 3 days ago really brought home the difference between the past and the present. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoya. I think that between hope and despair, I think I'll end not by talking about the 2024 elections, but by talking about the JNU Students' Union elections. I think there you have a clear example of what JNU has been through over the last 10 odd years. And then here, ideology is not dead, resistance is not dead, and hope springs eternal in the human breast. So I think we, Amir, that's for you. We hope that never mind the way in which business as usual has continued after the 2024 election, but there are signs that resistance is picking up. And let me add one last point, which is my favorite theme, is that opposition exists not just in Parliament, but across the federal democracy that we are, that if the opposition is able to make a dent, and if the government is still trying by whatever means it can, through whatever institutions, through governors, through this, that, to stop the opposition in the states, that means that there is an opposition which still exists. So,
can I just add to this my favorite point, apropos the JNU-SU elections, which is I want to really flag the point about the importance of opposition unity. In the JNU-SU elections, if there was unity between different left groups, they would have done much better. Actually, they would have swept the elections, and BJP would not have won 24 out of 42 seats in the JNU-SU Council. So I think there is a lesson. The lesson is from the 2024 elections about the importance of opposition unity, and there's also a lesson to be drawn from the just concluded JNU Students' Union elections about how important it is to unite in opposing, this right-wing juggernaut.
So that's for next time. And now for this time, we are winding up.
Yeah, I think it was time we did that.
Yeah, so I'll turn to the organizers, whoever wants to come in to say the concluding words, and then we'll call it a day.
Thank you,
Is
sir.
it Vikash? Yes.
Sir, thank you, sir. I will not take more time. Just I would like to invite to Dr. Subhangi for the vote of thanks. Over to you, Subhangi, madam.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, everyone. My name is Shubhangi Amle, and I am a research scholar from Maharashtra. On behalf of Indian Research Scholars Association,